Oh, it appears that I am live. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. I always talk with my funny voices first thing in the morning when I am starting to live stream. Oh, it is too much fun. Well, yesterday, I did a bit of a tutorial, I guess you'd say, on the OpenToonz / Tahoma schematic. Schematic meaning what some people refer to loosely as the node editor, which I suppose is a bit of a carryover from Blender terminology, I would think. So anyway, that video kind of sort of went the way of the buffalo. And so I thought this morning I'm going to go ahead and do both for my own enrichment and yours, do a quick recap of the schematic, because if you're doing the OpenToonz thing or the Tahoma thing, and basically the differences between the two are very, very, very small and very, very few, it makes so whatever you learn pertinent to OpenToonz ports over to Tahoma2d very, very well. It's basically the same software. So you're not missing anything by learning one or the other. The schematic is one of the most important things to understand and wrap your head around and master if you're going to use OpenToonz or Tahoma for a number of reasons. One is, if you come from a Photoshop, GIMP, Krita type of vantage point, as I do, then you are probably used to, let me see here, I'm going to open up some recent project. So, scenes. You're probably used to I'm just going to grab something randomly here. A paradigm that is stack-based and layer-based, okay? So yeah, this is a way ancient shot that's not even in the show anymore, but you might be used to the idea of a signal flow that goes one of two ways, actually. If you look at Blender before version 2.8, the way they handled their layer stack with the grease pencil was actually kind of the opposite of the intuitive way. The idea would be almost like pouring water down the pipe. And so the last thing to come out was actually composited on top. And so kind of the opposite of what you'd think, whereas most software that deals with pictures and layers generally is more intuitive in that what's on top gets composited on top. So as you can see in this goofy picture, the arms layer is in fact on top of everything else. A node-based compositor or a schematic takes that concept and turns it on its head a bit, because it gives you the ability to use these connections to take a signal, if you will. So I'm going to refer back to this, because the signal here only goes one way. It falls down through the stack. Okay. Whereas with a schematic or a node-based compositor, you could ostensibly draw a branch to some other node and then reconnect them in all different ways. So all the limits of a stack-based paradigm are circumvented in a node-based paradigm. So why do I say that? Well, the reason I say that is that when you think about OpenToonz or Tahoma, one of the more useful aspects of the way it deals with imagery is the idea of what it calls a smart raster level. What that means is you got one level or one layer. Each of these rows more or less corresponds to a layer in a stack-based layer type program. And each of these layers is inherently only one layer. Okay, so that sounds a little confusing when you think about it, but it's kind of like this. in a program like Krita or again GIMP, Photoshop, whatever, you can take multiple layers, put them in a group, stack them together, and then bake them down, you know, into a single layer at times if that proves to be the smart thing to do. Whereas here, the only way you can get that effect of multiple layers of stuff is in fact to use multiple columns in the X sheet. And so that's where blending modes come into play. Typically in your Photoshops and your Kritas, each layer of your imagery, you have the ability, and right here it's just a pop-up, to choose what the blending mode of that layer is going to be. So if I change this blending mode from normal to overlay, which is one I use a lot, you can see that it completely changes the way that the colors composite together. The interaction of those layers is controlled by the blending modes. Well, in Tahoma, you can't just assign a blending mode to a column. Okay, so you don't really have that ability to treat it like a stack. However, if you use the schematic, you do have the ability to assign blending modes to layers. And as you can see from this rather complicated compositing setup, you can actually do quite a lot in terms of the way that you mix and combine layers. So I'll unpack this a little bit later. But I'm recapping this today because the video yesterday, the live stream, basically the second half of it, I ran into some software issues, and as far as I'm concerned, the whole session kind of went south in the second half. So I took the video offline and tried to do an edit in YouTube's editor to tighten it up to the stuff that was actually useful, and then repost a video that was just about learning the schematic. Let's just say that process kind of sort of worked, but it was a little underwhelming, and I didn't want to sit and fish through the video and figure out what did work and what didn't. So I decided to just kind of do a recap here. So I'm giving myself essentially maybe half an hour to just review the OpenToonz and Tahoma2d schematic, because if you're going to use this software and you don't learn the schematic or you don't understand the schematic, you're missing out on a great deal of the capability and power in the program. So, okay, so with that said, the first thing I want to point out, and now I will put on my Sadhguru voice so that I can speak with great wisdom, and you will value very highly, much more than gold, everything that I will tell you. Okay, no, I'm not going to keep doing the Sadhguru voice. I might do like I did yesterday and pretend like maybe I'm, you know, maybe I'm from Chicago or something like that or whatever. I don't know, somewhere out there, one of those big cities. Okay, there are two schematics actually in OpenToonz and Tahoma. There are not one. There are two. So in OpenToonz, the default hotkey to open the schematic is F3. If I'm not, did I just say Tahoma or OpenToonz? I don't know what I said. I meant OpenToonz. Okay. I don't know this 100% to be true, but the last time I checked, if you install Tahoma2d, the default hotkey of F3, which was kind of a traditional default hotkey for the schematic to open in OpenToonz, that default didn't work anymore. I have no idea why. I don't really care, but you can set that up in your preferences if you want to. So you would you would configure shortcuts, and I believe if we just type the word or type SCH for schematic, there it is, and then you can assign a hotkey to it. Okay. This is interesting. Toggle FX. Oh, okay, yeah. So this would be if you wanted to assign a hotkey to actually switch between the stage schematic and the effect schematic, because as I said, there are actually two of them. They do different things. They're very related to each other, but they're very different. You know, you go to each of the schematics for different reasons. So we'll get to that here in just a brief period of time. Now, some of you who might be tuning in today are saying, "Hey, man, aren't you going to like get around to the animation stuff?" And you're right. Yesterday we made pretty good progress. Actually did these two shots. So we got this one shot of Tianara, and then I'm particularly proud of this one, which is the shot that I have open right now. but I really like the way it came out, and one of the reasons we'll be looking at the schematic is because this bloom effect was done in the effects schematic using basically a sequence of 2 or 3, maybe, well, actually I think 4 different plugins. And it's worth noting also that fairly complex compositing scenarios such as this, let me go back here. This is what it meant by toggling between the 2 schematics. You can assign a hotkey to that. Anyway, but even with all this going on, the rendering in Tahoma2d is pretty darn quick. You have to have a lot of processing going on to actually bog down the renderer. Now, the downside, you could argue, to a program like OpenToonz in terms of your real-time interaction with your art, if you will, is that what you see when things get rendered is not necessarily what you see when you're working in real time. And real-time performance interacting with your imagery is a bit more sluggish if you are looking at your art, and let's say you were painting onto this on a layer. In real time, it's going to be a little choppy because you're going to paint a line and then boop, it's going to take a second to actually process that and figure out what it's actually supposed to look like. So one thing I do recommend is on your panels menu, you have the ability to pop up another viewer. Okay, so let's just say we take the combo viewer. The combo viewer is the same as a standard viewer, except the combo viewer has all the tools attached to it in a toolbar. It's actually, for our purposes, it would probably be cleaner to just use a standard viewer. Okay, so what you can always do is just open a second viewer, and I've done this many times, and I'll push it up on another screen. Hey, Dirt. So that I can see, so that I can do things in real time here on this screen, but I can glance up and see how that's going to be affected by the actual compositing process. Okay, so again, just to recap, what I'm covering here is kind of for semi-beginners who aren't super familiar with the OpenToonz and Tahoma schematic. But again, really, really important that you understand the schematic and how it works. Okay, so let's just talk first about the stage schematic. Okay, so the idea of the stage schematic is this is not about image processing. This is not about how different layers of visuals interact with each other, or the way that imagery is filtered, or the way it's blended with the other layers. That's not what this is about. That's what the effects schematic is about. The stage schematic is about structure. It's about the way that your levels interact with each other from the standpoint of animation, how they're grouped, how they're parented. Does in this case, for example, what you see is we've got a layer called mouth, a layer called eyes, a layer called column 4, somewhat mysteriously. That's actually the shadows, and I should have named that SHD for shadows. And then we've got this column, which is our main character. So let's call that CHAR for character. Okay, so I'll just drag this around a bit, and if I turn off these little icons right here, actually the orange ones, you can see that the contents of that particular layer disappear. Okay, so the question you might ask yourself is, top of the stack, and hang on half a second. Hey, Enio-san. Okay, so I was just waiting for OBS to reconnect so that things didn't disappear. Darren T told me yesterday that despite the fact that OBS is set up, after if there's an interruption in the stream, that it picks up from where it left off, and that's why there's an increasingly a longer and longer and longer stream delay. In point of fact, what he told me is that no, actually, when there's a break in the stream, it just there's a break in what we get to see, which is kind of bad. So I'll be looking at that because that's not a cool thing. But anyway, the point I was getting at is this. Like I was talking about a stack in a program like Krita, you might think that stuff to the left is on top of stuff to the right. And it is, in fact, quite the opposite. So it's almost like a flow. And whatever's to the right gets composited on top. Okay, so everything to the right is on top of everything to the left. That's why my backgrounds are always in the leftmost column. Okay, now, but you can completely override that through the effect schematic. You can actually change the order in which things are blended together or composited over top of each other. Okay, so from a structure standpoint, why does this look the way it does? Well, it looks the way it does because these are all pieces of the character. His mouth, his eyes, his shadows. And I thought I just renamed this, but apparently it didn't take. And still doesn't want to take. That's kind of weird. C-H-A-R. There we go. But the OpenToonz or Tahoma plastic tool lets you... you guys probably know this, but it lets you do things like this where you sort of take the character and can bend it and squish things around using a skeleton, right? So I hit the X key, you can see the skeleton. And if we go into animate mode, you can see what that does. Okay, so that's important from the standpoint of talking about the schematic, because the only reason that those bones can influence the image is because the bones are on a separate layer from the image, and the image content, which here we'll call the character, is being piped through the plastic tool column. So this column is being piped through this column. And this column is in essence with the bones controlling this column. So the reason these are all structurally combined together is because if we're going to move his body around, well, if his head's going to turn, don't you kind of want his eyes to move along with the head? Of course you do. Well, hence you go into the schematic and you grab the eyes column and manually pipe them through the plastic tool as well, which is exactly what I did yesterday, and that's why this is structured the way it is. Okay, so another question that's come up many times, it actually came up in the chat a couple days ago, is how do you like take a, in fact it's actually the reason I started talking about the schematic is because I was answering this guy's question, is the question would be, how do you take a whole bunch of layers and scale or move them or basically or animate them all together as a group? And the answer I gave, the way I've done it many, many times, there's actually more than one way to do it. The simplest way that I've found is I just go kind of interesting, because now I can take any other levels. In this case, since these levels are all being piped through the plastic tool, just to make it simple, I'm going to just take the plastic tool level and pipe it through this one. Okay, so now what's going to happen is this level is going to effectively become the controller or the parent of everything else, because it's all being piped through it. And you say, well, what if I wanted to scale my whole scene because I'm like doing some motion graphics or something? Okay, well maybe in that scenario you'd actually also include the background. So now everything's being piped through this level, which means if I come over here and hit the A key, anything that I do by animating this level, as you can see, is going to affect everything that's piped through it. So that shows you that this is all about structure. This is the actual kind of mechanical structure of your machine that you're building. And these are all the pieces, and all the pieces fit together into a little bit larger pieces, and those can be combined. You can combine them in all kinds of different ways that you decide. Okay? But so the main purpose of the stage schematic, one could argue, is pretty much about animation. It's about combining stuff together so that you can ultimately move things around the way you want them to move around. So again, that has pretty much nothing to do with how the imagery is actually going to look. It's about how it's going to move, not how it's going to look. If you want to deal with how it's going to look, then you need to pop over to the This stage schematic, which I'm so sorry, I said that wrong. It is because I became Sad Guru, and Sad Guru had a brain fart. Um, I meant to say the effects schematic. So the effects schematic has to do with blending modes and effects. So this is a rather complicated scenario. Therefore, to make it a little easier to understand, I'm going to start turning things off. Okay? So bear with me for half a second while I start just turning things off. Yeah, because the way these are combined, let me see here. Wow, that turned everything on. Okay, so the destination for all of your layers ultimately is, of course, your output. What you see on the screen is your output. Right now, we see nothing. Well, why do we see nothing? Well, because all of the effects are turned off, and effectively, because I turned off this one in particular, which combines these three layers visually together and actually controls their stacking order, because that's turned off, the signal, if you will, from each of these layers isn't actually getting to the output. We could circumvent that, for example, by saying, well, let's take this layer and just go straight to the output. Oh, there it is. See? Piece of cake. So, and as you see here, this is an interesting aspect of it. Notice that this signal from our character level is going in two different directions. So if I took this and bypassed this and went straight to the output, now we'd see these three layers that are combined together using an over effects. And what does over do? It composites one layer over another. Okay? So the reason I combined these together is because I wanted to do a color adjustment, and they're all in different levels. I mean, his eyes are in a different level from his mouth and different level from his body. But I want to color correct them all together as a group. How do you do that? Well, the way you do it is you combine them all together with an over effect. So that would be in your effects, which there's a zillion of them, folks. There's a zillion effects. You go into layer blending, over. So over means it's just exactly intuitively what you think if you had some transparency and you just stack it all up, one stacked on top of another. There's no special mathematics or calculations going on in terms of how the colors interact. It's just a dumb, stupid stack. Just stack them up. And so the over effects effect is actually quite useful in that the ordering is stack based. So I want the eyes to be on top of the face, obviously. So therefore, as you can see here, if you look closely, the eyes are in the top slot. And every time you plug something else into a slot, Tahoma or OpenToonz will magically add another slot so that you can keep adding as many. So the over effect is for combining as many levels as you want into a single node so that you can then do something with it. So then the question becomes, well, okay, what are you going to do with it? Well, in this case, what I did was I did a level adjustment. So if we double click this, this is a very, very, very useful plugin that you'll come back to again and again, which lets you control the overall RGB levels, or you can deal with each of the channels one by one. It's not quite as powerful as a curves tool, because a curve, if you think of it this way, with a curves tool, what you're doing is you can create an S curve. So you're creating a non-linear mapping of the darkest to the lightest values input versus output. The change isn't necessarily a linear straight line change. I don't know if that totally makes sense, but take it for what it's worth. Whereas when you deal with a level adjustment as opposed to curves, you're effectively doing only linear adjustments. It's a straight line. In other words, it's a curve that's always a straight line. It's never like an S shape or, you know, a complicated curve. In this case, and by the way, this is important to note too. Here, just because you might want to fiddle with it, when you change the gamma in a level or a color adjustment, you're effectively introducing that non-linear component to your adjustment. So the reality is that to a large extent, not 100%, but to a large extent, the sort of control you have with curves, the combination of straight level adjustments with gamma gives you a lot of that flexibility that goes with. But I'm not going to dive deep on that. Bottom line here was I wanted to make a color adjustment, right? So now let's disconnect that. And then what I did was I said, well, but this guy's got some shadows. Here's this shadow level. Well, how do we make the shadows composite over top of the character? Well, there's more than one way to do it in Tahoma. But the way I chose to do it, as you can see, he now has these shadows. If we turn off the shadow layer, they disappear, right? Okay, so the way I did it was with a multiply INO plugin, which is in your effects, layer blending, INO, multiply. Okay, I like multiply because it just tends to work well with shadows, but also when you use it, by default, it has this feature called clipping mask. And what clipping mask does, if you look really closely, you can see that when I turn this off, you can see the shadows that I drew bleeding out over the edges of the character. So the clipping mask locks your shadows to your character. Okay? So, and by the way, again, this is just one example of a million things that one might do in the process of using the effects. Good morning, Maria. And it makes a duplicate of it. It just makes a duplicate and then offsets it a little bit. That's essentially all it does. It also acts like a clipping mask in that it clips the duplicate to the original one, and then again, without getting into the mathematics of it, here you can see all it did was take the drawing of the character and just make a copy of it and move it down a little bit. And then the area where they're not overlapping, so essentially you're reversing the mask, if you will. And the area where they're not overlapping is just brightened up. Acts as a highlight. That's really all the body highlight does. And then, of course, you do have the ability to blur it. You can add a little bit of blur, which the default blur level works, 4.5 pixels. Generally works pretty well. And of course you can also change the color. Now the invert, as you can see, now it does the opposite of what I said. It makes the copy and brightens up everything through the copy. So it'd be like this. It'd be like if you took your character, this is like if you wanted to roll your own version of it, which I've done many times in Krita. It's like you take your imagery, you say, well, let's make a copy of that imagery, just offset it a little bit, and then use your curves tool to clamp it down to complete black and then invert it to white, or just clamp it up to white and then make it a little bit transparent. And wango bango, that's all a body highlight is. It's one of the most economical effects in the sense that you get a lot of bang for your buck. It makes your visuals look really good even though you've done almost nothing to achieve it, right? So, okay. So carrying right along, the other thing that I did yesterday, I think the final thing I'm going to talk about with the effects schematic is a new effect that we have in Tahoma called bloom. And the reason I'm going to go over the bloom effect is actually because I decided to roll my own bloom effect. So I want to kind of do a little comparison of the two. So what I just turned on was just a curves tool. So here's your curves tool. Here's that S curve I was talking about. And that was just to darken up the background a little bit. So here's the thing to consider. If you want to if you wanted to, if you're actually wanting to brighten up your character, let me just show you this. This is probably an important thing to understand. Okay, this is where you really want to look at overlay mode and how it might be helpful to you. Okay, so what the heck are you talking about, Dave? Again, if we invert this, there we go. Well, the problem is that that really doesn't look very good. And the reason it doesn't look very good is because it's being the highlight is being composited in over mode. What that means, and all it means, is that it would be just like if you took the same, if you took a white image, so you're taking your image of your character, turning it completely white, and then making it, as you see here, 50% transparent. So there's no blending mode going on. If you're going to use it the way you're describing to light up your character, then you're going to want to, so multiply, add, lighten, boom. So as you can see, there is no blending mode baked into the body highlight plugin that actually is appropriate to what we would really want to be doing here. Okay, so the way I would solve that is I would probably go like this. Let me just think about this for half a second. I would say this. Take your character and add layer blending INO overlay. Make your main imagery the background, and then make your body highlight the foreground. And I suspect, yeah, there you go. Now it illuminates it in a lot more natural way. And then you can also, of course, dial this down, right? So now you can really, so it really feels like a light illuminating your situation. It doesn't have that washed out cloudy look that the over blending mode gives you. And if you want to recap on what that looked like, it would be to just plug that in there. So we'll take that off, and you can see that without using the overlay mode, frankly, turning it down is not going to help. Turning down the transparency, it's still going to have that cloudy look of just pure transparency where there's really no mathematical interaction going on between the pixels of the overlay and the pixels of your imagery. So for that reason, seriously consider using the overlay plug-in to be able to treat the body highlight like bona fide lighting, essentially, which is really why you use it in the first place, right? So, okay, so there's that. I'm going to switch this back to the way I had it before. And now we're going to experiment a little bit with the bloom effect. I think all in all, if we go back over here, I'll put this on the big screen. The imagery from the shot I did yesterday came out pretty nice. I really like the way it looks. And if you go through it slowly, you can see that the way that the lighting is interacting with the character and bleeding over him is a genuine bloom effect. That's what a bloom is. So I nailed it, if I do say so myself. So the question is, how good is the bloom effect that's built into Tahoma? Well, when I fiddled with it, I wasn't actually overly impressed with it. So let's take a look and see maybe why. I believe it was under lighting, and bloom is the effect. Okay, so we turn on bloom, and you can see it's a pretty massive bloom. So the first issue I kind of had with this new exciting bloom effect, which it is cool, was that the defaults are, how do I put this? If you were going to take this, what you see right there, and with some other filters or effects, composite it over your main imagery, then it would probably be pretty useful. But I don't know that it's any more useful than a garden variety glow, So let's start looking at ways to get it under control. The size actually probably isn't that bad. When I rolled my own, as I recall, yeah, I actually used a blur value of 200 pixels. So I would have to say that probably their size is pretty close to good. The thing I had a little trouble with was that you really have to turn it down a lot to get the effect to get it under control. And as you can see, if you turn everything down, I would just say this. What we're seeing right here is decidedly non-intuitive. You would think if you took all the parameters of an effect like this and turned them down as low as they can go, basically the effect would be getting turned off. Now that's not necessarily true, but intuitively I think for beginners especially that would make more sense. So what we're seeing here doesn't make sense, especially I would say this. If you were going to then say, well, okay, what's the opposite? Well, the opposite would be turn everything up all the way. Well, let's see what that does. Okay, and what that did was really okay, I think Tahoma had to recalculate the compositing because okay, so turning the effect up, there we go. Now it's behaving the way it's supposed to. So turning the effect up all the way just results in a really, really loud glow as well. Okay, and again, I'm not sure. Yeah, I have to sort of wake it up so it recomposite. Okay, so let's look again at the parameters. All right, so given a choice between all the way down and all the way up is probably better. So I'm going to turn, now what I'm going to do is start turning the values down one by one to see what happens. Okay, so if you essentially have no glow or no blur on the effect, then this is what you get. And so it's essentially just like brightening up the lighting. So it's really not doing much at all that you wouldn't accomplish just as easily with like a curves tool or something. So the only thing that's valuable about a bloom effect has to do with the bloom, which is the glow or the blur, right? So therefore, let's go back to what we started with, which is a blur of around 200 pixels. And as you can see, in terms of the effect I rolled myself, the blur is pretty much where it's supposed to be. So the problem we had a moment ago is if we turn our values all the way down, it doesn't turn the effect off. It turns everything off. And that's a little confusing. So now what we have to do is let's start easing things back in and see what happens. The gamma, frankly, the gamma shouldn't matter. I'm going to just put the gamma at 1 and ignore it for the moment. So now here, again, like I said. Okay, so another thing. Right now we're seeing Tahoma really having to be woke up to recomposite this every time you make a change. And that's a little bit that doesn't bode well for Tahoma because I've rarely seen that with effects. As you can see what's happening here, it's okay, just so you guys understand, what is happening right here is that essentially the rendered composited version of my drawing okay. So as a result, I'm going to turn this back up again. Okay. So now I'm going to start bringing just the gamma down and see what that does. Okay, bringing the gamma down, again, decidedly non-intuitive. I can't imagine most people having a clue how, even if you know what gamma is, I mean, essentially gamma is a mid-range curve. It'd be like, here's a flat curve of either EQ or of color correction, like a curves tool, and you say, let's bump up the mid-range like this, or let's bump down the mid-range. That's essentially what a gamma adjustment is. How that maps to the look of I think I'm going to stop there because for me, interacting with it, this is not what I would actually even call a bloom effect, if you want to know the truth. Being well acquainted with a bloom effect from digital compositing going back for the last 25 years, this is not what I would describe as a bloom, or at least what I can say is that there's no way I've been over top additively so that everything gets brighter and appears to glow. But with a bloom, the whole idea is not to make everything glow. The idea is to make the bright stuff glow around the stuff that isn't bright and bleed over top. Okay, let me say that again. The whole idea of a bloom effect is not to take everything that's a little bit lighter in your scene and make it glow. That's not a bloom. That's a glow. A bloom is when only the brightest things in your shot, which in this case would probably be this area right here in the outdoors, and then maybe the highlight, maybe the rimlet part around him. Okay, but the idea of a bloom is that just that stuff would glow, and then as a result of it glowing, the glow bleeds over top of your character, bleeds onto the stuff that isn't dark. Okay, that's what a bloom is. What I'm seeing here is not a bloom, as far as I'm concerned. It's a glow, and it's a fine glow. It's a good-looking glow, but for me, it's not particularly useful. So I said yesterday, all right, let's roll our own bloom. So I'm going to recap that because it's a good way to take a look at the effect schematic and some of the things you can do with the effect schematic to roll your own effects. Because here's the reality. The basic tools are there, and there's basically nothing you can't do. If you want to compare Tahoma or OpenToonz to Krita in terms of blending modes and the ability to blend layers and levels together in creative ways, the truth is everything you can do in Krita, you can do in OpenToonz. It's just a little quicker and a little more interactive in Krita for me much of the time. Okay, but it's all here in Tahoma. If you want to be a monolithic one application fits all kind of person, there's nothing wrong with that, and trust me, you can do it. So my goal yesterday, therefore, was to say, well, let's create a better bloom effect. And so I'm going to recap that today. And then Darren T said something yesterday about saving this algorithm as a macro. I don't even know how to do that. You just combine them like this, and is there a pop-up? Yeah, make a macro effect. So there we go. You could save it as a preset or make a macro effect. So anyway, here's what I said we would do. This is our imagery of the prints, and what we want to do is create an actual proper bloom. So what I need to do is the following. I'm going to describe it verbally for you so that we understand intellectually what we're trying to accomplish here. What we're trying to do is we're trying to create a situation where we have this stuff that's really bright in the scene glowing like crazy. And then, but just the brightest stuff glows. And then what we want to do is we want to have that stuff that's glowing laid over top of the imagery of the prints in such a way that it not only brightens up, you know, makes the doorway glow and whatnot, but it also causes the glow to bleed over top of the edges of this character. Okay, that's a bloom. That's, as far as I'm concerned, it's the definition of a bloom, is the idea that it bleeds over top of stuff that isn't affected. The Tahoma bloom effect, as far as I can tell, seems to affect everything. In other words, there's no concept of a mask baked into that, and I don't know how you get a bloom effect without a mask, because the whole idea of the bloom would be to take the main part of the character that's darker and mask it out so that it doesn't glow. Why is that important? Because if you don't do that, then everything in your character is going to be out of focus because everything's getting blurred. Again, that's fine if you want a glow, but it's not a bloom. It's a glow. Okay, so having said that, how do we achieve an actual bloom? Well, based on the description I just gave, the first thing we know for sure is that we're going to have to do the thing that's so cool that you can do with this schematic, which is we're going to want to branch off in two directions. This is our scene, what we're seeing on the screen here, going right to the output. And so what we're going to do is we're going to create a second output that will be composited over this imagery that we're looking at right now. So what would that look like? Well, let's start going through it step by step. So we're going to break this connection so that we can see what this other connection, this other pathway for the visuals is going to look like. So the first thing I did was I added a curves tool. Okay? So if you look at the curves, it's a really steep curve. So what I did was essentially I really pumped the contrast. Okay, now I could modify it a little bit like this. That would not be against the law, because getting a little bit of this involved in the bloom too, looks pretty good. Now I'm gonna experiment with modifying the curve a little bit. Yes, okay. Because what I want to do is I want to make it so that the effect that comes off of the edge of him is much less pronounced than the effect that's going to be coming through the window. Okay, so that's what I did. So step one is to create another branch of imagery that only cares about the stuff that's really bright in the scene. And now we're effectively masking out everything else by just clamping it down to black. Okay, that's step one. Step two is, we're just going to crank down the saturation. That's all this does. It just makes it doesn't make it black and white, but it pushes it closer to black and white. Okay? That is a taste choice. You could actually leave that turned off. Okay, what's step three? It's very, very simple. Step three is you blur it. So there you go. Big blur. And that is a big blur. If we turn the desaturation back on, you can see it hardly makes any difference at all. So actually, my suspicion is we could just pull that out of the algorithm. So now you're going, wait a second, that's all a bloom is? A bloom is nothing more than clamping, boosting the contrast on your image so that only the brightest stuff can be seen, and then taking what's left that's bright and blur it. And then how do you composite that over the top of your main image so it looks like a bloom? Okay, so here's the blur, and again, 200 pixels. It looks really strong, doesn't it? I mean, that is one strong bit of blurring going on. And then I combined one over the other in ADD additive mode. So the foreground is the glow, and the background is the original imagery. So when we put one over top of the other, we get this. Okay, so now I'm going to turn as you can see, as far as I'm concerned, it looks better, a lot better actually, with this turned off. So we're actually going to make our algorithm even simpler. So it's nothing more than high contrast that's blurred. High contrast that's blurred. And the reason it looks better is because what you see here is, by not cranking down the saturation, the blue sky is actually bleeding onto, because this helmet is gray. But yet here it's tinted blue, because what's happening is, because of that bloom effect, the blue sky is reflecting onto his helmet, which is exactly what you would want from a bloom effect. Okay? So with really only two effects, and then a compositing and additive mode, we've completely duplicated, and in my opinion, strongly exceeded the quality of the effect that the built-in bloom effect has. Now, if you fiddled with it, does it turn out that the bloom effect built into Tahoma2d is like really cool? It probably is. For me, it took a lot of fiddling, and I never did come up with anything that seemed useful. So if we turn the blur down, you can see what that does. Now this is what most people would more likely call a bloom effect, because you're really seeing a softening in the flesh tones and whatnot. If you're going to go with this kind of a bloom, okay, and the only difference between the two, like if we turn the blur down to 0, then we're back to, all we're doing is we're just basically brightening things up. So if we take a 100 pixel bloom, then probably you're going to want to go into your additive effect and crank the opacity down. Get it a little more under control, right? But then we're losing some of the bleed over onto the like onto his skin and stuff. So to me, and by the way, in this case, I don't think the clipping mask option means anything. I don't think it does anything. Okay. So for me, splitting the difference, I'm going to say a blur of 150. Yeah, that feels pretty good to me. Let me jump it back up to 200 and see how that feels. But I feel like this gives me a lot more. I'm gonna split the difference again. Let's do 180. This gives me a lot more what I would call intuitive control over the effect, where it does exactly what I intend for it to do, and it makes sense why it does what I intend for it to do. I wasn't really able to make head nor tail of the Bloom plugin, but you guys play with it on your own, and let me know if you learned something that I've been able to figure out. Because it could be again that there's some hidden tricks up its sleeve. But with that, I think we're gonna. Yeah, it's been almost an hour, so I pretty much beat the daylights out of the Tahoma schematic, and so today's animation work. So I'm actually hitting the Q key and looping this and turning it on here, and I'll be back in 5. Nothing but fun. Nothing but fun. Okay, OBS Studio keeps on disconnecting and reconnecting, and you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do something radical right now. I'm going to stop the stream and restart it real quick. Start streaming. Okay, I'm back on, and the reason I did that, did I do that? Is it done? Let me see. I think it is. Okay, I think I'm live again. Okay, the reason I did that was so that we would get rid of the long delay in the stream, because there's like a 17-second delay, and I apologize for that. It's really not my fault, but OBS has a vexing tendency to disconnect and reconnect quite a lot. So what I've really wanted to do is set up a port tunnel in my router that directly connects OBS through the router on a port that's always fixed. And I've had other situations with other hardware interfaces and things where by setting up a dedicated tunnel, if you will, through your router, you can actually create a much more stable connection. And I have not been able to find good information on how that can be done, if indeed it can be done at all, using OBS. So it is what it is. Let's get back to work, shall we? Well, let's jump over to the show and see what we're dealing with. Okay, stop the play button. Okay, again, this is what we did yesterday. TNR is like, okay, this is that Prince guy. And the Prince, as you can see, is feeling rather awkward. He has absolutely no idea how to deal with or interact with this girl. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the full screen preview so that I do not have to switch screens. And that way I won't have the mistake I've made a bazillion times of being on the wrong screen and then forgetting to switch back. Okay, and plus you get to see it full screen, which is obviously a little bit better visually. So what happens next? She says, she makes a slight nod acknowledging the Prince. And I'm looking at my script to see about the dialogue. Okay, and she just says, Highness, and kind of waits for him to do whatever it is he's going to do. Okay? So that's where we're at the moment. So how are we going to accomplish that? Well, I did a few preliminaries already, which was to take the previous scene with Tianara, which was 510, and immediately resave it as 512. So if we open this up, we'll go ahead and actually, before I do this, let me hit Control-Shift-R. I'm going to re-render this scene because I made those slight modifications to the bloom effect, and so now we can see that reflected in this shot. We can see the bloom being a little bit more aggressive. We can see a little bit more of the blue bleeding over onto his helmet, which I like. So I think it's just a slight improvement on the effect. So now, having done that, with the quick and dirty re-render, we can open up 512, save all, and get back to Tianara. Okay, so now the question becomes, what the heck is she going to do? Now, as I was talking about the schematic, we want to look at the stage schematic, and what we see here with Tianara is kind of a similar situation where her body is being affected by a skeleton, and then all the other parts of her body, which in this case involve the... I didn't label these columns, and I should have, so let me just go through here and start seeing what each of these are. I'm going to go ahead and get these named right now. Okay, this is essentially the whites of her eyes is really all this is. So I'll just call this whites. This is the irises of her eye. So let's name those. It just makes sense to name these things. Obviously, this is the main character, and this is the mesh that's controlling the character. Now, there's one thing I want to... Okay, I want to make sure that when it's rendering, everything is working properly. Why the layer that has the whites of her eyes looks so bright and wacky, I'm really not even sure what's going on there. But for our purposes, we could actually, for the moment, just turn this level off. And it won't affect, so that's done with these little orange icons. These icons affect the way it looks when it's rendered. So if I put it in full render mode, as you can see, that turns those layers off and on. Layers, levels, I use those terms interchangeably. So for our purposes, we could, it's 6 and 1 half does the other to me. I could have it on or off. It's really not that much of a distraction. But I don't know why it looks the way it does. It looks rather strange. Let me do one thing. I'm going to hit the tilde key, which is a hotkey I have mapped to effectively soloing the layer. So when I hit the tilde key, what I'm really doing is I'm making this menu option happen, which is show this only. And then when I click Control tilde, it does show all, which means that everything becomes visible again. Okay? So, here we go. I think this is going to be a simple scene. I would say that what she's doing there, a quick blink. Honestly, the acting is not too far off of what I think we're going to want anyway for this shot. I don't think that the eyes moving up and down and all around is necessarily that important for this shot. She should simply be looking at the prints. So I'm going to take these two keyframes off that are holdovers from shot number 210. So she does a blink, and whether she's going to move her eyebrows like that, we will decide a little bit downstream. So I'm going to turn on the plastic tool level, I'm going to hit the X key so that I can see the skeleton. And as you can see, her eyebrows are actually being controlled by the skeleton. All right. So I'm going to say that at least for now, this keyframe is not needed. And I'm not sure what this one down here is, so let's take a look. Again, it's a little bit of a snarky look. I don't think I'm going to do that on this shot. The irises looking down, up and down, that might be useful. I'm going to smack that up high for this shot. So I'm basically going to slide this. And by the way, some of you guys out there are using the let's see, let's go to the timing room. Some of you are more comfortable with a horizontal timeline. I am too. I use it constantly in Krita. In Tahoma/OpenToonz, I really just never quite got on board with the horizontal timeline. By the way, I'm once again seeing some weirdnesses here where now the imagery, let me hit Control tilde and make sure everything's showing. The imagery of her body is not showing. So there's definitely some buggy weirdness going on under the hood today with Tahoma. And for the moment, I'm going to ignore that. We'll deal with it here shortly. So I'm going to go ahead and allow her eyes to, she's going to blink and do a quick up and down with her eyes. And then all she's going to do is kind of perk up a little bit and say, Your Highness. And then she'll probably blink again. So with that, let's save all. Save shot 512. And then just as a abundance of caution, I'm going to restart Tahoma, and then this way ancient shot I was using for demonstration purposes in Krita, I'm just going to close it. So let's go ahead and reopen Tahoma and see if we can get things a little back under control. Sadhguru says that you must be very, very, very respectful of your tools. Sometimes they will disappoint you, but that's okay. Okay, so now this is interesting. What just happened was effectively the animation, and this is, I'm sure it's my fault, but basically we lost the initial keyframe. So what I'm going to do is, with the plastic tool, I'm going to put the plastic, oh, no we didn't. Actually, it's because it's in build skeleton mode. Build skeleton mode is for changing your skeleton, which I don't need to do. But it's good to know that you can change the skeleton at any time, even after you've animated it. Sometimes that has side effects that are undesirable. You got to be careful. But let's go into animate mode, and as you can see, now her eyebrows are back down where I want them and can be animated if I choose to in this shot. So one question that might come up if you haven't used the plastic tool a lot is, how did you get this bone? If you look here, this bone is pretty short, and usually when you think about animating a skeleton, you're kind of talking about grabbing nodes and rotating them around, basically. But one thing you want to be very aware of in OpenToonz or Tahoma is this little option called Keep Distance. If you turn it off, it allows you to stretch the bones like so, not just rotate. If we turn it back on, we can no longer stretch it. We can only rotate. Okay, so use that as needed. It is, in fact, integral to this rigging, because I specifically drew the character in such a way that her eyebrows are up here above her head. And I did it that way specifically so that I could use the plastic tool to put controllers on her eyebrows and then move them into position. So it's basically puppet animation 101 if you're going to, you know, use the plastic tool as your preferred way to animate a character rig. Okay, so again, I hit the X key. The X key invokes the plastic tool, and we are in animate mode. And for our purposes at the moment, I'm going to go ahead and save all so that the next time I open it, it's not in that, so that it's in the correct state, if you will. Okay, so what does she actually do? All she's going to do is she's going to blink, look up and down, and then she's going to kind of sit up a bit and say, "Highness." That's it. Okay, so the way I rigged this, I rigged it in such a way that if I were to animate her head, because of the way the bones are connected, it creates a situation where rotating her head causes the whole eyebrow rig to move with her. So it's important to really think in advance about how you're going to structure your rig if you want to get a little bit fancy with your character animation. So I'm going to have her tilt up a little bit. I don't think... I'm going to make one more change actually here. File, let's save all. I'm going to go into build skeleton mode. I'm looking at one thing here. I'm going to go ahead and drag this up here. And you'll see why in a minute. Now I'm going to go to animate. And now what I want to do is just make sure that that didn't break anything in terms of how things are moving. Okay, that's good. So she's going to go like that. And I added, okay, so this is important too. If you go into your file preferences, this is a very important setting, is animation. Okay? I'm not going to completely break down what this does, but if you have this set for linear or any of these different interpolation modes, then what it'll do is, in the time between one keyframe and another, it's going to interpolate between them and gradually move from position A to position B. If it's set the way I have it here to constant interpolation, that means everything is a snap. It's going to immediately jump. As you can see, we're in this position, then we're in this position, but it does not gradually go from one to the other. It stays on the one until it hits the keyframe, and then boop, then it switches. So all I did here was added a second keyframe, so I'm essentially rolling my own interpolation. I'm basically adding an extra keyframe. What I could have done instead was I could have said, let's get rid of those two keys. Let's change our interpolation back to linear, which I happen to like linear. A lot of people like easing. It's a matter of taste. Now if I put her in this position, as you will see, she's going to gradually go from one position to the other, which in this case is not particularly desirable, although it could be. The way I would make it so it is I would take this first keyframe and drag it down here so that that whole transition happens more slowly. So everything north of this keyframe is going to be locked to the values for that keyframe. So now what we get is no movement and then a fairly brisk movement to this position, which is effectively the same thing I achieved with the two constant keyframes. Both ways work. There's no right answer. It's just a matter of what you're wanting your character to do. Okay? So if I hit the L key, which is the playback key, I think that'll work. I would say probably I want to put that down one more frame so it happens just a skosh quicker. And so she... let me think about this for a minute. Okay, I'm going to say I want this to be the opposite. I'm going to have her tilt up and then look him up and down. So I'm really trying to expose her what she's thinking. I'm really trying to play with... Okay, and then this happens too fast. This happens too... doesn't happen too fast. It happens too soon. Okay, so... Alright. And this, again, I believe this is constant interpolation. This is just the eye blink. All this is an extra layer I added to cover up her eyes so that I can add an eye blink wherever I want to. So, now let's see what she does. Okay, now this blink should actually precede the move of the head, because that's, people really do that. When they go to move, they tend to blink actually. So all right. So now what we're going to do, remember we've got linear interpolation turned on. So now she's going to do one more blink, and when she says highness, that's when I want her eyebrows to do something. So for my purposes, I don't want to, if I use linear interpolation, I'm going to have to copy this keyframe so that between here and the next key, nothing happens. You can do that. I could copy this keyframe and then add a new one, and then there'd be a motion between the two. That's not, I don't want to do it that way. I want to make this a little bit simpler. So I'm going to go ahead and change my interpolation back to constant so that future keyframes are interpolated that way. So she's going to look up and down, a quick blink, and now she's going to say highness. All right, and so now this is where I want to fiddle a bit. I'm going to turn off keep distance. And I think just a little motion like that would probably be about right. And then when she does that, I'm going to say probably another slight change in orientation like this. What that means, and I'm pretty sure I'm correct in how I'm explaining this. What it means to you and me is that when I move one bone, it's going to set animation keys for all the bones, all the nodes, all the joints, whatever you want to call these little dots that you're moving around. Okay, that's what a global key does. It creates a key that affects the entire skeleton. Well, that's oftentimes not desirable. What we saw a moment ago was that I moved her eyebrows, and then I went back one frame and moved a completely different bone. But when the very next frame, when her eyebrows moved, that bone that I just moved actually flipped back to its prior position. That's because when I moved her eyebrows, effectively, I was creating a key for that bone as well. That's not what I want. So I'm going to turn global key off, and I could be wrong, but I think that's going to solve the problem that we just bumped into. So now what we're going to do is the same thing. We're going to turn off keep distance, and we're going to say, okay, little raise of the eyebrows. But then we're going to go back one frame, turn on keep distance so that we can't accidentally stretch things, and go like this. Now what should have happened is that when we go to this key, this bone should not snap back to the prior position. And it didn't. Okay, so that is indeed what global key is all about. Do you want to set a key just for the bone you're working with, or do you want to set it for the whole bloody skeleton? You want to be careful about how you make that choice, because sometimes one way is preferred and sometimes the other way is preferred. It just depends. Okay, so she's going to go, Your Highness. Okay, that's it. And that is it for this shot, actually. So let me snap back here. I'm kind of feeling the timing here. Okay, this feels a little too sequential. I feel like these should be blended together a little bit better. So I'm going to go ahead and roll this back one notch. Okay, and boom. Okay, there's something extra here that's bugging me. Yep, it's the same thing. This blink, I think, should happen either coincident with or just one frame prior to that shift in her weight. Okay, and that's not bad. So then she's like, Highness. Okay, that's it. That's all she says. We're just getting into her conversation here with him. So with that, I would say this can probably, I'm going to hit Alt up arrow, which is going to take the entire timeline and just start chopping out frames. So we're going to go with 36. I'm going to check my render settings, my output settings. This is set to render for shot number 512. And so with that, I'm going to hit Control-Shift-R, render the scene, and let's cut it into the show. So let's go back over here. This shot is the one I just did. I'm getting rid of it. And now we're going to bring in the image sequence, see how things are looking, and then on to the next shot. Scene number 512, render, open the sequence. There it is. It's at 8 frames per second. And we drag 512 in here. And then it's just a thing about Vegas is that by default it wants to interpolate between frames at 24 frames a second. And so I always have to turn off the resampling for my characters. Okay, that worked. Okay. So she kind of is not so sure about this guy. He's very awkward. He says, hello. Doesn't know what to do. Highness. Okay, so she's, in a sense, emotionally, you could say she's trying to let the guy off the hook a little bit here. Whether that's really going to work, we'll see. Let's save all. So the next shot is the prince, and he's stumbling over his words in a big way. He says, I'm looking forward to, and then she's going to jump back in and say, it's an honor to bring our kingdoms and our families. She actually says, it's an honor to bring our families and our kingdoms together. Okay, so she's kind of trying to help him out here a little bit, right? All right, so with that, we have a choice. Do we want to go ahead and do shot number 514, which is Tianara saying those lines? Right now, we might as well, since we're already in here. So let's go ahead and save this. File. We're going to save this scene as 514. And then we're also going to immediately go into our output settings before we go any further and make sure it's going to render into the correct place, which is going to be shot number 514, render. And so now we save everything. We're going to assume that the scene with the prince being all awkward already happened, and then the question is, what is Tianara's body language on this shot? So she looks at him. Actually, in the storyboard, what happens is she looks at him a little awkwardly. It cuts to Mel. Okay, this is interesting. It looks to me like I made a mistake. Okay, I think what I intended here, if you look at 513 to 514 to Mel to 516, yes. So this is actually 517, not 514. Although for our purposes, it doesn't really matter. So what's actually happening is he's supposed to be stumbling over his words, and it cuts back to her just watching and listening. And Mel is outside the tent overhearing all of this. So let's just give this half a second to consider a couple things about the prince. In the storyboard, we see that we've got, I mean, this is basically the pose that we have, and of course he can bend his neck and things like that, but we don't really have these drawings or these complete changes in position in there. Now, I would want to be really careful about how I animate that, because it's kind of a big job as far as the character animation. It's like some fairly subtle moving around. You want to kind of make sure as best you can that it's going to work before you go ahead and spend half the day creating that shot. I'm basically pretty sure that these poses aren't that necessary or helpful, and I say that because we have a lot of mobility in his expressions here, just with what we have here, and probably for our purposes, he could look away without having to necessarily turn his head, right? If you're an animation purist and that makes you cringe because you're into like the Disney thing and you want to see characters moving around all the time, then you and I are going to have a difference of opinion, because I, being at this point in my life more a student of anime than a student of sort of the Disney style of animation, I personally like a more understated approach. I actually think it is better storytelling than a more difficult and complicated approach that involves things moving a lot. Basically, animation is not actually that important. What's really important for me and for the way we're trying to tell the story is the still images, the characterization, and the way they use their face especially is really important, because there's so much that you can do and say with that. So anyway, I just want to kind of make that point that I'm not just trying to be a cheapskate in terms of avoiding the work of doing the animation. If it really is germane to the storytelling, then we want to do it. But if it's pretty much 6 of one, half of the other, so you can spend 10 minutes or you can spend 2 hours and the basic emotional effect of the storytelling is about the same, then we're going to favor the 10-minute approach. That's just the way it's going to be. So hopefully you can be on board with that, and hopefully you agree that by and large the storytelling, the visual aspect of the storytelling, is working pretty well. Okay, in this case what we can do, let me think about this for half a second. If we take this keyframe and we drag it down here, we drag this down to here, okay, and then we look at any other columns that might have an initial keyframe. It's possible that this is important. So this may not make all the sense in the world, but what I'm doing is I'm taking the keyframes that create the initial position of the character and dragging them down here so that everything north of frame 24 can be deleted. Okay. So now I'm hitting Alt A and I'm just killing all these keys. So we start out there. And then the eye blink, you know, it's there if we need it. Okay, yeah. So in this case, what we're going to do is get rid of this keyframe. Okay, but that gave us her initial eye position. So let's just see what happens if we get rid of this one, get rid of this one. Let's just kind of create a new initial position here. So I'm going to say she's up like this because that's where she ended the last shot. And we also saw that her eyebrows were up a bit. And now what I'm going to do in this case, I'm going to try to find sort of a neutral expression that you could buy the idea that she's kind of waiting to see what the guy's going to do or say, right? She's basically being patient. So this is almost a bit of a throwaway shot. I think, let me go ahead and extend this out to about 24. I think what she probably should do, what I'm wanting to see is something like this. So she's kind of like this, and I'm wanting to see a little bit of a change as the prince is stammering. So maybe about here. Let's go. Boom, bop. Maybe about there. We will say. Oh, let's turn keep distance off. Okay, now the question becomes, what about her eyes? Let me look at this level. Okay, what I'm going to do is, actually I'm going to create a duplicate here. Just in case I'm going to need it. Now I'm going to go in here, and we're going to make one modification. I'm going to say, let's give her a little bit of a... Okay, that's weird. That's freaking weird. Is that just a preview thing? Okay, that's freaking weird. I'm going to save all. Yeah, Tahoma's acting a little buggy today. Little buggy today. I start painting down here with one color, and it starts painting up there a different color. And by the way, when I click on this image, nothing shows up at all, which is extremely strange. Okay, I just saved this, so I hate to say it, but I'm going to reload it. I'm not going to restart Tahoma, but I'm going to reload the scene just to see what happens here. Yep, and okay, I can kind of see what might have gone a little bit haywire. Shot number 53, or yeah, image number 53 in this sequence is actually her irises. So I'm dancing with disaster by hitting duplicate and putting another image here anyway. So this is probably getting into some nuance that might be a little boring for some of you guys out there, but it's kind of important on my other screen here that I look at my image sequence and see if anything's been changed down here. And then probably it would make more sense to duplicate this in Krita. So yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take shot number 0051 and I'm going to copy it to 0054, make some tweaks to it. I'm going to go ahead and do it in Krita and then resave it back. And when I reload it here in Tahoma, what will happen is after editing this image sequence, the image I'm about to draw will show up right here. Okay, so you can take my word for that. I'm going to hit save all and jump over to Krita. And what I'm going to do is grab this image, drag it in here. And I mentioned this yesterday. I mean, the bottom line is that the painting capabilities in Krita is not only much greater, but it's also less buggy than in Tahoma. And so for that reason, I tend to favor it. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is immediately save this as it's temp_1.0051. I'm going to resave it now as 0054. Saving. There it is. Okay. There it is. It's there. Okay, and OBS has now got a delay of about 3 seconds, so hopefully we're not going to lose too much stuff. But anyway, let's go in here, and now we're going to use our industrial strength painting tools in Krita instead of our anemic painting tools in Tahoma. And all I wanted to do was just do a little bit of a squint thing. A little bit of a squint. Now we've got the disadvantage here of having to deal with multiple colors, but you know, I think the world will probably keep turning. So there's that. Alright, so now what I'm going to also do is just underscore her lash situation a little bit. So I think that will do the trick. That's really all I wanted, was just a simple little change in expression. So now, as you can see, shot number 54, and by the way, this isn't quite as simple as it appears. There is no 0052. Okay? Just so you know. So Tahoma is smart enough to understand the image sequence, even though 0052 doesn't exist. I'm going to do the font. Well, yeah, and I'm not going to change that. The reason I'm not going to change that is because I could stick a 52 in the sequence. The problem is that her irises are referencing 53, and her body is referencing 51. And I don't know this for sure. Excuse me, sorry about the sneeze. I don't know this for sure, but I'm a little concerned that if I introduce a 52 into the sequence, that it might actually break the way Tahoma knows what image I'm supposed to be referencing. Now, to be fair, actually, let's go ahead and do it, and I'll show you why. If Tahoma screws up, all we actually have to do is go into this level that's the irises, and if we look at our level settings, we can trick it. Well, yes and no. Actually, this is a little dangerous, because as you can see, what it's telling us is, okay, this is actually quite dangerous. What we see here is that Tahoma is referencing this image on the basis that it's this image sequence, but we don't see anywhere it's supposed to be referencing number 53, as opposed to adjusting its math and being off by one. I don't know if it would or not, actually. And I'd rather not fiddle with it. I'd rather not create that problem. So for our purposes, let's just reopen the shot. We'll save the scene only. And then what we should see, if we go here, is, ta-da, there's the new drawing. Okay, so that all works out great. We can have her do her thing. And then right about here, I want to introduce this slight change in attitude. And, of course, I always reserve the right to have it not work. Okay, and I would say if we're going to do that, these two things should probably happen together. Okay, that's it. Control-Shift-R. We're going to render this out, pop it into the show, and see how we're doing. Boom. Let's go to Vegas. And we've got to come back to the prints. So here's this. Scenes. 514. Boom. There it is. Render. Open the sequence. It's only 3 seconds long. Boom. 514. And we'll pop that in there. And so now if we jump back to here, we'll be able to watch this full screen. And so Prince is stammering, stammering, stammering. Highness. I'm looking forward to... yeah, not bad, not bad, not bad. Okay, so let's go here, and I want to change... You can't see this, but I'm disabling the resampling so you don't get that ghosting going on when it animates. Okay, so that's just her reacting to the fact that he's stammering all over himself, right? So there's that. File. Save all. I'm going to leave that as is, and now I'm going to jump back to the prints. So this is going to be shot number 513, which of course doesn't exist yet. So we need to open up 511 and immediately save as 513. Okay. And what we'll do is we'll animate all his dialogue, even though actually it's going to be split into 2 pieces. But he's saying it continuously, so we might as well. And while he's stammering, of course, we're seeing TNR's reaction, right? So we might as well do this as a single straight through sequence, right? So the cool thing is that because of what we did in the schematic, as you can see, all the visual quality of this shot's already done for us because we did it in the prior shot. And so there's that. And with that, I will look at the script, and he says, I'm looking forward to... okay, so, yeah, there's some acting here. Let's see what we can do with it. Let's see what we can do with it. I think I'll go ahead and have him perk up like that, but there's one thing I'm seeing in his skeleton that I want to mess with very briefly. What I'm seeing is if we go into build skeleton mode, I'm kind of feeling like, let me think about how I want to do this. I need to be careful. This is risky behavior. I actually think, okay, the solution to the problem I'm not really describing very well, is actually that this line right here should really be a straight line. It really shouldn't have that bump out curvature to it. So I'm going to be bold and actually make some mods to the drawing itself, and that will affect the other shot that involves him, but honestly it doesn't matter. It's going to look better if we do this. So that's it. That's all I wanted to do there. Okay, so now if we go back here, you can see that it's under the mesh quite a bit more, but basically that looks pretty good. So this is shot number 513. Let's save all, and that will effectively cause this imagery, this TLV file, the smart raster level, if you will, should update in shot number 511 as well. So let's do a couple things here, a little bit of due diligence. This is going to render to 513, so this is all set to go. So let's leave that. We'll save all, give Tahoma half a second to save, and then let's just open up number 511 again. And as you can see, this has been corrected, and now I'm just going to hit Control-Shift-R and re-render 511. So that updates. So this is why I use Tahoma. This is the advantage you won't get in Krita unless you really get into a lot of cutting and pasting cells and layers from one Krita file to another. I like the fact that this is procedural. It means if I fix something, it gets fixed in, you know, all the other upstream and downstream files that are referencing the same assets. It's quite useful. So here we go. Jump back to 513, and if we notice back here, we can see that this rendered. So now this goofy little bump that was happening right here is no longer in it. Yeah, that looks way better. Definitely. Yep, I like it. So we're good. Back to here. So who's out there? Nobody's talking too much today. We got looks like 7 concurrent viewers, and we're having absolutely nothing but fun. Just kind of wondering who's out there watching. Why are you watching? What are you here for? What are you interested in? Are you an animator? Are you an artist? Who the heck are you anyway? I know who Inyo-san is. I know who Maria is. I know who Dirt is. That leaves several who aren't piping up. I'll bet you Darren's lurking. Darren, are you lurking out there? All right, so this shot previously ended like this. So now the question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want to come back and start from this? And my answer would be probably not. So Momoristic, hey, welcome. You're new, I believe. Tom Doing Art, I've seen you. I appreciate your taking it in. And yeah, I've seen you, Tom, on, if I'm remembering correctly from about a month ago, you're the guy that was on Discord who did some really, was it you who did some really good work unpacking and documenting some of the code on Tahoma for the purpose of making it easier to do builds and things like that. I seem to remember that. It seems like that was the... was that you, Tom? I thought that was you. So if I'm correct, then Tom is a accomplished, I would guess, C++ programmer, and probably proficient in other languages as well, and quite a talented guy. And I say that because, so Tom, if you could just post, what was that you that I'm thinking of? Yeah, you're the guy. Okay, so the reason I mention that is that what Tom did, I can't actually emphasize this enough. When you think about open source software, what Tom did or is doing is perhaps the most valuable thing that can happen in the ecosystem surrounding a piece of open source software. Why do I say that? Because and see that, okay, I can build it. Now I can go in and start grokking the code and figuring out what I want to try to fix or change or whatever, right? Having that process documented well is indescribably valuable. indescribable. You can't put a high enough value on it, because contrast it with what would you do if you didn't have that documentation at all. You'd be really hosed, because you don't understand what all the gotchas are, all the dependencies that make getting the thing built, make it go wrong, and then you have to manually by yourself just hope and guess and post questions here and there and hope somebody answers as to why it went wrong, right? So I can't. Yes, I remember that, Tom. So setting up the local environment so debugging is possible. Yeah, it's impressive that you did that. It not being a C++ guy, actually. Now I am a C++ guy, and I just haven't. I'm kind of like too busy making a cartoon to go in and fiddle with the code, right? So, but I can't emphasize enough how important good documentation is. I know when I write code, I'm religious about this. Is that I actually am gonna write everything I write. I'm gonna write in pseudocode first, almost not quite plain English, but I'm gonna write it in pseudocode and generally translate that into comments, so that I'm gonna always have twice as many comments as there are actually lines of code, so that any idiot can come back and look at that code and understand what's going on. Okay? Why do I do that? Because I'm the idiot. I'm the guy who's going to come back to my own code just a couple weeks later and go, what the heck did I do? What was I thinking? Right? And the difference between, for me with clients, for example, let's say writing a fairly extensive code base, in this particular case that I'm thinking of, involved a lot of PHP and JavaScript, okay, because it was a web-based application. And we're talking about a piece of software that has run completely error-free for about 8 years now, maybe pushing 10, actually. The only way I could have my client contact me and say, hey, can we make this one little change to it? And have me be able to go in and not actually lose a week just trying to bone up on how the code works. The only way you avoid that is you document profusely. So enough of the rant, but I can tell, I understand programmers too, and I'll tell you, I could tell when I went on Discord and I saw the comments that Tom was posting. I'm thinking, I like this guy. This guy has the mindset I like. Now, it's not definitively the right one, okay? There's a lot of different ways to approach code, but I really was impressed with the way he posed questions and answered them, and was really just taking responsibility for saying, okay, here's what I'm going to do. And then he goes and does it, and then he says, okay, I did it. Review, please. Are there any issues? Let me know. Very meticulous. And I can see that he's not just protecting all those other programmers out there, he's also protecting himself, and which I have nothing but respect for. Now, one of the reasons I say that, by the way, is that this is not tremendously unlike, having done large programming projects and having made movies and all the rest, I can tell you that this very animated show is very much like a programming project. It's why I talk about workflow. It's why I like the fact that Tahoma is procedural. It's because it allows you to create assets and components that can be reused intelligently and creatively at different stages along the way. And it's very, very easy to paint yourself into a corner. So the quintessential example in my workflow would be if I literally did everything in Krita. The problem would be that if I had 3 shots that all use this pose, and then I realized that 3 shots ago there was some glitch or hiccup in the art that was just egregious. I was like, we got to get rid of that, right? I would have to go in and manually go into every one of those scenes and change them. So, and it's like a law of the jungle. You're never going to fix it exactly the same way twice, right? You're not going to draw a circle exactly the same way twice. It's impossible. So having a procedural workflow, which I just demonstrated with Vespar's helmet, is that I can go in and change this art, and all of the scenes that reference that art, they just need to be re-rendered. It takes 30 seconds. So it's a really, really powerful paradigm if you can wrap your head around it. Sometimes it's better to hard code things and bake them in. and sometimes it's better to be procedural because it's a trade-off. Typically, the trade-off is between kind of your it's usually a trade-off between memory footprint and performance, actually, right? I'm not going to unpack that, but it is generally, just as a simplistic statement about programming, it's generally a trade-off. If you want more compact code or a smaller memory footprint, then you got to do more calculating algorithmically in real time, and so you tend to sacrifice performance. And finding the sweet spot between all those considerations is kind of the art. It's what makes programming very much like art, because you're just designing a solution to the problem. And the question is, how much is the solution you chose going to bite you in the ass later? Sometimes, in the perfect world, it doesn't very much. Oftentimes it does. And the problem is you don't know what you don't know. So anyway, enough about that. All right, so I'm going to look at Tom's comments because I've been sitting here flooding him with praise. The install instructions, I do pseudocode too, and high-level comments act like a chapter. Yeah, I could tell. Just looking at your comments that you posted on Discord, I could tell. I really get how this guy approaches programming. Class diagrams are good. High-level hierarchical information definitely can help. That reuse and flow through the changes is a nice thing. I'll give you an example of what's the complete opposite. The complete opposite would be, oh shoot, now I can't remember the name. What is the open source node-based compositor that's programmed by a French guy? I can't remember the name of it right now. It's an open source compositor, really powerful compositing program. Kind of like Blender's, like the schematic in Tahoma or Blender's node-based compositing. It's kind of like that, but it's really deep, really powerful, really good color correction tools. There's just one little problem. If you go and look at the official documentation for the software so that you can actually get up and running with it, you discover that 90% of the pages in the documentation say coming soon, basically. Say to be filled in later. So you're going like, the documentation is non-existent. The outline of the documentation is there, but all the pages contain nothing. So it's like, okay, to me, that is the telltale sign that the ecosystem around that application doesn't really have its act together. And that's okay. That's their choice. If you want to use it as your own internal tool and you don't care if anybody else understands it, that's fine. I mean, that's a legitimate choice. But if you're going to put it out there as some sort of open source thing that's available for everybody because it's so powerful and there's so many cool things we can do with it, and then you provide zero documentation, really? I have very little respect for that approach. It's like, stop what the hell you're doing, take a month, get the documentation up to date. Okay, so enough about that. It's all kind of fun. But right now I'm not in programming world, I'm in animation world. And so what the prince is going to do is he's going to, this is all too much. This is all too much noise and activity. So what I'm going to do is I think that it would serve me best with this shot to hit Alt A and just erase everything downstream. And then I'm going to hit, I said Alt A, I meant Alt up arrow. And now I'm going to hit Alt down arrow and just extend it all back down. Okay, so now we've basically gotten rid of all the animation, and I'm going to save this as 513. And as I noted earlier, I actually don't want this shift to the big googly eyes. So I'm going to get rid of that. Boom. And I think that kind of gets us started with a clean slate on the acting here. Okay. All right, so yeah, I mean, I tell you, Tom, we could have a lengthy discussion. I guess if I can keep moving forward on the animation, I may keep discussing it because to me it's very interesting. If I wasn't doing animation, I'd be doing something code related. I'm quite sure, because it's tremendous fun. I'm very much, although I have a lot of experience with CC+. I mean, come on, go down the list. CC+, PHP, Pascal, Delphi, Lazarus. Obviously JavaScript. Geez, there's a few other languages in there. I've always loved it. Going back 30 years. to the early 90s, actually. Yeah, 30 years. All right. Okay, so that's the eyes layer. I think what I'm going to do here is, let's look at this drawing. Okay, so one thing, okay, so this is good news. Good news is I did not bake his eyebrows into the head. That means I've got a little bit of flexibility on how I deal with his eyebrows. If we come back here and look at his eyes, the question is, are the eyebrows part of it? Let me see. And they are. So that's going to work against me a little bit, but that's okay. Just kind of looking at the structure here. Because what I could always do is take this eye drawing, make a copy of it, erase the eyebrows, and then go ahead and smack some eyebrows on another layer if I want to do that in order to have a better ability to animate his eyebrows. So we'll just take that as it comes. But the question right now really is, what is this guy going to do? He says, I'm looking forward to... okay, so he does not know what to say. So I think he'd go, yeah. So that's what would happen. So here's his mouth. And let's pop this in here. Can we do that? Well, we can sort of do that. Let's go like this. And make a hole. Pop that down there. And now I want to have him just kind of go, okay, and then I'm feeling like right about here. I guess I shouldn't have extended these down all the way. We're going from this. Okay. We'll smack this in here just to see how it feels. Okay, we never did use this one. I wonder what that feels like. Let me just see. Yeah, again, as I said the other day, I feel like it's a little too much. And we never use this shot, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go take this, hit the S key, Control C, and I'm actually going to, whoops, get rid of this and hit the S key and paste this back in. And the reason I did that is, for now I'm going to, this is a great example of procedural versus hard-coded. What I'm doing is I'm hard-coding the eyebrows into the eyes, which means I don't have the ability to move them separately. Okay? I could, but again, this is what I was talking about with programming. It's a choice. Are you going to hard-code your eyebrows to your eyes? Or are you going to leave it more procedural where you keep them all separate? It's just a choice. It's a tug of war between expediency and flexibility. In this case, I'm going to favor expediency at the moment. And I can always change my mind by just doing a version of the eyes that have no eyebrows at all and then just adding a new layer. So there's that. So again, you know, it's just a choice. But I like that. I like where that gets him. I don't want him to look too rattled. He's just nervous. And now I'm going to do a real quick check on the comments and stuff. And nothing too much. Tom said the thing about documentation is often a neglected follow-on to project priorities. Right, and you know, again, it's a tug of war. In a perfect world, what would happen is all the documentation would actually come first, and then that would guide the development. The problem is, it's like business development, where you say, you know, you really come up with a really rigid business plan, and then the very first day you open your doors, you find out there's something in your plan that's really flawed, right? And that's what usually happens, is you actually discover that that really perfect plan that you spent weeks really mapping it out, everything's going to work just exactly this way, and you're one day into it and you find out that, oh, actually, it turns out that that doesn't quite work. That's really common. So if you're aware of it, no big deal. So we're going to go, yeah, and I want to see a little bit of a shift here as well with the old plastic tool. So it depends on waterfall or iterative style of development. Yeah, I mean, I can see when you have an idea about but the asset we use to the full animation series. Right, and again, this is what I'm talking about. Looking at the second to last comment Tom made is that the problem is that um, sometimes it's because of fixing mistakes. Like actually, there's an example right here I didn't mention earlier, but I've been kind of noticing it. If we go in here and look real close, there's a glitch right there. Well, what are we going to do about that? Are we going to ignore it? You can, but it'd be better to fix it. So we fix it. Well, now that creates kind of a reverse dependency problem, you might say, meaning that the problem is that I've got an earlier scene now that's going to have to be re-rendered. Okay, oops, that's not what I intended to do. And if I hit Z, oh, thank goodness that worked. I meant to hit the fill tool. Okay. It's a great example, actually. Okay, so I fixed this, and the current scene is now looks better, right? Everybody's happy. Who's going to go back and pull up the 5 or 10 or 20 other scenes that reference the same image and just re-render them? Who's going to do that? Okay, it would be my opinion that I would follow the Brian Tracy school of business development and achievement, and I would say this. One of the things Brian Tracy says is, do it now. Do it now. Don't wait. Don't procrastinate. No. Do it now. Just do it now. It crosses your mind. Just go do it. I think Brian's right on this point. Generally speaking, this is the better path. So I fixed this, but the problem is this shot must be re-rendered now, or else the fix will never show up in the show. So I'm going to go ahead and do it now. Was that worth the 14 seconds that it took? Absolutely. This is the problem in the ecosystem surrounding software development, is that there's really nothing fun to someone who's really interested in grokking the algorithms and making the software better and excited about a new feature. There's really nothing glamorous or particularly fun about what I just did. And so it's just really understandable that it often goes neglected, and you wind up with this increasingly long list of things that, because the list is getting longer, there's more and more things that everybody looks at that list and goes, ugh, right? So now waterfall or iterative, I can kind of guess what those terms mean. I've never used those terms. So, and you don't have to, explain them out or anything, but I can kind of guess. I would guess that waterfall versus iterative has to do with time scale. So, in other words, are we going to build? What I just did would be iterative. In other words, the minute something changed in my little ecosystem, I'm immediately going to go back and do my due diligence to keep everything up to date. So it's a constant loop of saying something's changed, we need to go tweak this, now we can move forward again, and it's like a loop that carries along. Whereas I assume waterfall would be, well, we just kind of keep moving forward, and then every so often we go back and we take inventory of what is broken or whatever. Is that a correct understanding of waterfall versus iterative? It would have to do with time frames, I would think. And for me, honestly, having been involved with a lot of fairly big, complicated projects, without a doubt, I would favor the iterative style. I would very much want to avoid letting long to-do lists pile up. Right. Yeah, and the problem with whether the re-render is important or valuable enough to spend time on, for me, is a silly question because there is no question that in the long run, of course you would want it to be re-rendered. Of course you would want that fix. So to me, there's no debate. It's just a question of when are you going to do it, right? If someone isn't doing frame-by-frame analysis of your animation, they won't spot the details you find. Well, of course that's true. Yeah. I mean, I've said that many times, is that the wonderful trade-off with animation is that the more exciting and fun your animation is, in other words, the more action there is, the more you can get away with murder in terms of having sloppy drawings. Why? Because everything moves fast. Your brain can't digest it, right? So it's a really elegant seesaw between the level of detail required and the amount of work you have to do. In other words, to Tom's point, yeah, waterfall is pre-planned and pre-designed everything. Iterative is a bunch of mini waterfalls. Okay, exactly. That's what I thought. Okay, so my personal opinion at my advanced stage would be this. Waterfall always looks better up front, always looks better to the money guys, always looks better to the investors, because they think that gives them a sense of predictability in terms of what's going to happen. And they turn out to be wrong 100% of the time. Right? Now, someone could disagree with that, but that would be my opinion. It's like, because I've done it so many times myself, you always turn out to be wrong. It's like the business idea, where you find out one day into it that your carefully laid plans actually don't work at all. And there's some stupid reason that you just never occurred to you. That's where having a procedural workflow is important. It could be noted that the character of Vespar, this very guy, his character design changed 6 months into the project. Like, the way I draw him completely changed, and I had to go back and change several shots to bring them up to date. And that you could definitely blame on poor planning, because that could have been avoided by just planning more carefully at the start. So, yeah, right, they want to guarantee holding the team to the plan. Exactly. Well, the problem with that that's so insidious is that it causes you to actually think that you can mark a deadline at which point you're going to deliver the software or deliver the update. Okay. The problem is, if you read Malcolm Gladwell's books, you know, or sort of Freakonomics, that kind of stuff, you learn that this is a real problem in human psychology. We're really attracted to that sense of predictability. But the problem is, you know what it incentivizes? It incentivizes delivering crappy software because you deliver it prematurely before you've thoroughly tested it. And then even worse, it incentivizes dishonesty. It incentivizes what you see in politics all the time, where people get on camera and they just futz around with trying to explain their actions because the last thing they want to do is just tell the simple truth. Well, actually, the truth is we knew the software wasn't ready, or at least we were pretty sure it wasn't ready, but damn it, we just wanted your money, so we just released it. And, you know, just because we were kind of hoping that the benefit of lots of profits this quarter would outweigh the pain of having our duplicity uncovered. I mean, that's the truth of what happens, and again, it's totally understandable. But it's also tremendously wrong-headed. It's actually why I think socioculturally we are moving, for good reasons, in a more progressive direction. Because we're recognizing that that duplicity has bit us in the ass over and over and over in so many areas of our daily life, right? And so after a while, you learn, you know what, sometimes it's probably better to slow down a little bit. This is something my beautiful wife Valerie has really drilled into me with this animation project, is slow your ass down and get the pictures right. If the pictures don't, like this picture, if this picture isn't pleasing to look at, if you don't look at that frame and go, wow, that's, you know, that's a cool animation cell right there that I'm looking at. If you don't have that feeling, no amount of animation will make it work. No amount of animation, no amount of moving stuff around is going to make that shot work if the picture sucks. However, it is true if you get the picture right, you can still screw it up with movement. But it's one of those 80-20 things where one ought to recognize that if the picture sucks, nothing else matters. So therefore, what's the most important thing? Get the picture right, then futz around with the movement and the stuff the little details that take it up even the next level, right? Okay, in playwriting terms, waterfall is the initial outline and plot. Correct, exactly. Get that first draft onto the page right. Writing is rewriting. What that means is, and I tell people this, when I talk to people about writing, and this reminds me of a comment I got from Centenari, one of my followers who writes very long comments on my videos, and he really thinks through what's going on in my head as a creator, and he kind of enjoys grokking out the process. One of the things that I tell writers is don't try to write your story so that it reads well. Don't write what you want it to feel like or how you want it. In other words, just write what you mean. In your own words, just spit it out of your gut what you mean in your story. What do you mean for the audience to feel, or what you mean to have happen? Don't worry about how you say it on the first draft, because the important thing is to capture that emotional driver that made you want to tell that story in the first place. Then you go back and rewrite and start futzing around with how to make it, you know, eloquent or whatever, right? Or visual. Waterfall in software is about defining your parameters up front and not releasing it until all those features are complete. Okay, so what Darren's saying is a really interesting point. Okay, Darren's actually adding a very interesting point to this conversation, because my argument about waterfall being the inferior paradigm is predicated on the idea that in practice, seeing the waterfall paradigm through to its proper conclusion basically never happens. Okay, that's my contention, and I say that that's probably likely because of the fact that the waterfall paradigm also fosters a tendency to set a deadline, for example. Well, what do you do when you don't hit the deadline? Well, you're screwed. Okay, so Darren's making a very good point. In the perfect version of the waterfall paradigm, it would be effective, and the reason it would be effective is because you would never release until every single goal in the initial plan is successfully achieved and tested and all the rest. So yeah, and Darren, your comment, I would completely expect that approach to software, which we saw being, you know, in the days of, you know, let's just say in the days of structured programming, we would have seen that approach a little more prevalent. And frankly, you can get away with it a lot more if you're writing command line utilities that are going to be later on, you know, kind of in Unix world, daisy chained together in ways that we don't even predict up front. We don't even know how somebody's going to ultimately use those tools. So for simple tools like that, it can work really well. So the scope of the project, you know, does inform your paradigm. But one could also argue that a small-scale waterfall is, in fact, identical to a large-scale iterative process, because the iterative process is like a mini waterfall within the context of a larger project, right? So in animation, the iterative process is essentially we're just creating what I'm doing. Not everybody would work this way. Some people would pencil test the whole show. There's nothing wrong with that. I personally haven't favored working that way. And the reason I don't favor working that way is because I don't like the feeling of a really, really, really long list of to-dos that have to be done before any part of my show can really feel like it's complete and can be viewed and see how it's all flowing together. I would rather get one little part done and complete, and hence I tend to do ink, paint, shadows, and post-production on one shot at a time, cut it into the show, see how it's flowing, and every once in a while I go back and watch the whole darn thing and see if there's anything that can be gleaned from that. Yeah, delays the opportunity for feedback. Excellent point. Yep. That's right, because again, we're talking about incentives. The problem is that the demands of the, well, this is really interesting, because if you think about it, what you're saying is that it's highly likely that there will become a disconnect between those who are ostensibly responsible for the work, meaning that they're the mouthpiece of the company or whatever, public relations, your administrative team. There's going to become a disconnect between those guys or women and the people that are on the ground actually doing the work. The minute that disconnect happens, you're going to have problems. And hence, I can, you know, wax philosophically about it all day, because guess what? I'm a one-man company and I don't have anybody to answer to. I don't have the and by the way, that's why I've been a one-man company for 30 years, is because every time I've gone down the road of allowing the organization to develop, hire more people, I've done all that. It's always turned out that the benefits are greatly exceeded by the drawbacks, for me. So, and it's just opinion, it's just taste. Yeah, they find out late. I'll catch up with the early part of the video. I saw the chat was, and I think it'd be useful to fully understand how I put you. Darren, let me recap that for you right now. It's so simple. It's stupid. It's so simple. Here's the bloom. I actually simplified it, and it looked great. All you do is take your scene, okay, and just do the following. So here's the scene with no bloom, and I'm going to just show you really quick. I don't even think you need to make a macro. It's so simple. So there's the scene. Now we take the scene and we add curves to it and we clamp it so that it's highly contrasty. So we push everything down to black except the brightest things in the scene. Next, we just blur it. Just add a blur. And then finally, we comp it over top of the scene itself in additive mode. And the biggest thing that makes a difference in how it finally looks is the size of the blur. I chose 180. Yesterday I was doing 200. Not a huge change. If you crank it down to 100, for example, you'll see it really pumps the contrast. It really pumps the bloom effect. My argument, which led me to grok out and roll my own bloom, was that, and I spent a little time early in the video before you were watching, with the actual bloom effect that's built into Tahoma 1.2. My contention is this. That is not a bloom, as far as I can tell. Someone else might work with it and get it to act like a bloom. But this contrast step with the curves effectively creates a mask where everything is not calculated into the bloom, or the glow, or whatever you want to call it, except the stuff that's the brightest in the scene, which means the stuff that isn't bright effectively is acting as a mask. And so then the result for you as the viewer is that the bloom bleeds over onto the character. And we see it here where the blue from the sky is actually bleeding into his helmet. This is a bloom. A bloom is a glow that bleeds over the stuff that isn't affected by the blurring or the contrast or any of that. What I see in the Tahoma effect that they're calling a bloom, as far as I can see, is not a bloom, it's a glow. Because it makes everything in the scene get blurred, and then, of course, internally it's overlaying it over it in some way, probably additively. But I wouldn't call it a bloom at all. It's a glow, and it's a pretty good glow. But because of the way they chose curve out, we can instantly see the effect that it has on the bloom. The problem with the bloom effect that's built in is that everything about it goes basically goes from this to this, as far as I can tell. You can never actually get it dialed into a level of effect that I found to be useful. So there's something about it that still needs a little work. Let's put it that way. So yeah, for me, just changing the contrast and the blur gives you everything you need. This is just additive mode. This is just, blending in addition. So it's about as simple as it gets. Yesterday I had another plugin in the chain that desaturated it. I took that out because what I found was if I didn't desaturate it, I'd get this wonderful bleeding of the sky colors into his clothes and stuff. Whereas when I desaturated it, you lose all that. You still get the bloom, but you don't get the color mixing, right? So anyway, that's it. That's a bloom. It works. Okay, so back to work here, folks. Yeah, but I mean, I've watched a lot of anime in recent months and years, and I'm telling you that what I see, most of the time, what we're talking about is a bloom. It's not a glow. Once in a while, you do see something where everything's glowing, but I find that to be comparatively rare. Now, if you did do that, if you made everything glow like that, and it was extremely subtle. In other words, if that's the effect you want, what I would do is I would actually just change the schematic so that all you do is, well, actually, here's what I would do. If you want to get the effect you're talking about, this is how you do it. Step 1, get rid of the curves. Don't even do the contrast thing, okay? And then probably want to turn your blur down to, oh, I don't know. I'm just going to say about 50 pixels. Okay? And then just crank the, what was the opacity here? I don't recall. I'm going to hit undo a couple times and see if it gets me back to where I was before I started. So I'm looking at my curves plugin and I'm waiting for it to turn on. Yep, here we go. No one more undo. Available. So I'm going to turn my curves back on. I think that gets me back. Yeah, there you go. So this should be 180. Yep, it is. So there you go. If you want that type of an effect, that would get you pretty close to what you're after. Just take the curves out so you don't have the contrast on your overlay. So sorry about that lengthy digression, but it's been a lot of fun. I enjoy these conversations. So so again, what is the prince's line of dialogue? It is, I'm looking forward to. Okay, that's it. Really awkward. Okay, yes. Okay, so now I'm glad I took that break, actually, because that got me a fresh eyes on the shot. What I want to do is when he goes like this, I want him to stiffen a little bit. Okay? So I'm going to hit the X key, and we want to be in animate mode, obviously. And now I'm going to do this. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give him a little stretch. So watch this. I'm going to turn on keep distance. I'm going to go boom. Boom. This might be too extreme, so we're going to see. And now to be safe, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this key, and I'm going to copy it here. And then just modify it with straightening up a bit. And I'm going to save my work so that I can see what's going to happen if I actually shift this a little bit. Yeah, that's definitely not happening. I don't like that. That's not horrible. So let's see what that feels like. Yeah, that's okay. Boom. Little bounce. And obviously his eye expression changed. And so he's going to say, okay, I'm looking forward to, all right, so let's go ahead and deal with the lip sync. So boom, there's that. Sorry, that was a mistake. It's the eye column. I want to be in the mouth column. Okay, so grab that, get rid of it. All right, so what we're going to do is do the traditional anime style lip sync. So we're going to grab these two shapes, smack them in there, grab the two of them, and we're going to reframe on twos. Boom, so they're two at a time. And he's going to say, I'm looking forward. I'm kind of cheating a little bit here with the prince and allowing him to speak English. And this is him saying, okay, so very awkward, very awkward. Stretch that down to there, and then we'll kind of, I didn't mean to do that. Then we'll decide what we're doing with the guy's eyes. Yeah, it seems like there probably ought to be some blinks in there or something. So, all right, rewind. Okay, stop. Here's a problem. He needs to pause half a second before the guy starts talking. So, I'm looking forward to. Okay, This didn't work. This didn't work, so this whole idea of speaking English we'll get rid of. Let me play this. Okay, and then here there would be, boy, I love this stuff because it's very delicate acting. I mean, it's really just kind of feeling what. Let's just see what happens if we go with this one, how that feels. Not bad, not bad. Not sure that I'm totally sold on it, but okay. I'm going to go with this and then see if maybe a little bit of that plastic tool animation will help punch it up a little bit. Okay. Looking forward to. All right. Maybe. Maybe. And gosh, golly lollipop, I'm feeling like I want another eye blink in there. Where is the blink? I'm going to go ahead and allow that blink to prevail, even though it's probably starting to get old because it's a very extreme blink. And didn't I have... I'm going to go ahead and animate from one to the other and see if it feels good. Oh, I see the problem. I don't want this. I want this, but with a little bit of a squinty thing. Okay, there's my squinty thing. But the eyebrows are wrong. This is where having the two baked together is starting to bite me in the butt a little bit. But that might be okay. Yeah, that doesn't work because it looks suspicious. Suspicious is not what I was after. So what I'm after is I'm going to hit the D key, grab this, and I want the eyebrows in the up position. So I'm going to grab this, Control C, go back to this drawing, select this, delete it, hit the S key again, Control V, paste this in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to try to fix up the bottoms of his eyes just a little bit. Okay, so the B key with the outline color. There's that. And then we're going to take the eraser and just get rid of that. And clean that up a little bit. I'm seeing a little bit of garbage right here, I think, so I'm just going to fill that in. Yep, that took care of that. And now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm not dead wrong, being a silly goose, this is where a blush might be useful, actually. Okay, the one thing I'm not so sure about here is that. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's okay. That's okay. What if we switch it to, I believe we have two versions of this. 1, 2. This one is left eye up. This one's right eye up. I'm just going to say maybe this will work. So I'm going to hit delete on that. That's right eye up. We're going to grab this, stretch it down, and then drag it back over. Wait, that didn't work. Okay, I just had a dyslexia moment. You guys saw it in real time, where I did exactly the opposite of what I intended to do. Sorry. Hate when that happens. I've done it a zillion times. A blush would be rather sweet. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And so that's pretty easy. What we're gonna do is we're doing this anime style. We're gonna go like that, and then we're gonna turn it red, and then we're gonna make it pretty transparent, and then we'll say probably go a little longer. Boom. Yeah. And then what we need to do, this is something I've very rarely done actually, but we're going to just animate the opacity of it. There's a zillion ways to do it. We could animate the opacity of the color, or I think in my case I'm going to favor doing this through the schematic. So if we look down here, there's the blush. And what we're going to do is insert effects, image adjust, adjust levels, and what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the alpha output. Okay? So the way we're going to do this, excuse me, is we're going to click the diamond, and that makes the parameter animatable. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is turn it all the way down. I'm going to go like 3 frames ahead, turn it up. Let's turn this on so we can see how that renders. Okay, we've got a little bit of a problem that I'll get to here shortly. Alright. But let's just see if that worked. Yes. Oh, okay, my bad. My bad. Yeah. Actually, one thing we need to do here is go in and change our preferences back to linear. So, sorry. So we'll set that there. And then let's turn that to fully opaque. And the problem is we can't see it. So that has to do, this is a little obscure, but it basically has to do with the fact that it really needs to be composited over everything. In this case, for simplicity, it would be easiest to just do that. So, meaning what? What did you just say, Dave? What I meant was I'm going to do layer blending over. And here's source 1, and source 2 is going to be the blush. So I'm just going to connect source 2 on top. And what we should see is the, whoops, is the effect ramping up, but we don't. Okay? So here's the problem. Maybe what I need to do is actually run this up to here and then hit that. I'm guessing. Yep, there we go. So there it comes in. And probably at this point the best thing to do would be just jump to the function editor. I'm really doing this in the clunkiest way. So adjust levels. We're looking at alpha output. You can see it's got an animated parameter. Indeed it does. I believe it was the max. I'm sorry, but I have to reopen this. Yeah, it's got the min and the max, and the max is what we tweaked. So now, there's, well, I guess there's our animation curve. So that's good. That makes life a little easier. So this is the animated parameter that we just saw me set, so that it goes from no opacity up. And then what we want to do, I believe we hit Control, boom, we can put in a node, and then Control, boom, we can put in another node, and then we drag this back down again to 0 or less. And so this is easier than working with the numbers. So it is hard to see, though. The contrast on the curves here is definitely a little difficult to see. So that's pretty close to what we wanted. Not quite. Not quite. We really wanted the ending of it to be here. So I would say something like that would be about appropriate. So you can see it's sort of a trapezoidal thing. And what we should see is there's a problem, because you can see that's what happens when the value of the alpha output flips to negative, to a negative number. So the problem there is that in the schematic, this level is not at 0. It's actually at below 0, which is problematic. So there it is. Yep, there it is. So this needs to be at actual 0. I'm guessing there's probably a way to get this to snap to the I'm guessing there's a way to make it snap, but I don't know what that way would be. So in this case, if it's slightly more than 0, you still can't see it. So we're probably okay to be actually not exact, as long as it doesn't go below 0. If it goes below 0, then it introduces a mathematical oddity, which results in a bad artifact. So. And by the way, I guess I wasn't thinking here, but it could be argued that why are you going to have the blush go away at all? Good point, folks. Why didn't somebody chime in and point that out to me? All right, so I'm going to go back to my, I'm going to go back here, and I believe what you do here is you, just delete those. So now the blush is going to fade in and stay there. There's really no reason to get rid of it. And then the good thing about that is we can, okay, so we're still seeing it fade out. Okay, that's because of the cache. The animation cache is updating. Okay, so now what we can do is we can dial it in even further by just adjusting the alpha level of the color. See? So we can have it be as bold or as dark as we want at its peak, if you will. Okay, so there you go. Maybe just type in 0 in the value box. You know what? Good point, Tom. If I grab this value here, like that, the question would be, where is the quote-unquote value box? There's the level. If I select it, that's not working. I can never remember. There's some quirkiness to how you just like freaking select stuff. You can't just drag a box and select it. I can't remember if it's you have to click it first. There's something. Okay, you click the line. Okay, so now once you click the line, I can grab this, and then you mentioned the value box. I'm not. Oh, there's the value right there. So this should actually be okay. So that's 255. Good eye, Tom. Very good eye. And the value here should actually be 0. So, yeah, well done. Thank you, sir. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm liking it. Okay, so, boop, 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 boop. Well, that's why I have friends out there in YouTube internet land who help me to not step on myself too severely. Okay, so with that, this is shot number 513. wouldn't hurt to just double check that we've got this set up correctly, and we don't. Whew, glad I checked. This should be 513. And save and render. Let's cut it into the show and see what we've got, because now we're into that iterative process we talked about earlier, where we may discover that we don't actually want to chop this edit together quite the way we thought. So yeah, thanks again, Tom. I appreciate the input. You guys are all great and super helpful. Super-de-duper-de helpful. Okay, so this is going to be shot number 513. Boom. There it is. There it is. And this is 84 frames. Whoa. Well, I told you we were probably going to split it in half. And then allow TNR's reaction to sort of happen over top of it. And by the way, you guys can't see Diddley right now, or can you? Oh yeah, you can. I'm sorry. Because I'm on the correct screen. You guys are going, what are you even talking about there, dude? Okay, 513. This goes here. Properties, disable resample. Okay, so now I can jump back to this screen so you guys can actually see the full screen preview of what we're talking about. All right. So we got this initial response. He just says hello, doesn't quite know what to do, and she's like, Highness, I'm very glad. I don't remember what he says, but he's basically stumbling over his words. I'm liking it. I'm liking it. It's debatable whether... Okay, so first of all, I probably will not split it in two. I think this progression feels about right. And to go from this, just a simple reaction like that, to Mel, and then we'll take this out. This is going to be removed. And then we'll cut back to TNR, and she says it's an honor to bring our kingdoms together. So we can have a little bit of fun in the sense that the next step really is going to be to go ahead and animate Mel. Get away from these guys for a bit because, again, we're getting a lot of reuse here, which is great. We're making a lot of progress, which is great, but, to a degree it gets boring just dealing with the same poses and characters all the time. One other thing worth noting, by the way, is that... Okay, Maria, are you sure you're not just being nice? I mean, are you being nice here? You really think it looks good not being split? I'll take your word for it. One thing I do need to do is, because of the plastic tool, what we see down here at the bottom of the screen, you see this, the plastic tool, that allowed that to bleed up. There's two ways we could fix that. One would be to crop the rendered imagery, which is certainly doable, but the reality is what we probably should do is fix the plastic tool to begin with. Okay, how would you do that? Let's find out. I'm going to hit the X key and I'm going to go back into build skeleton mode. What's missing here, and happily there really is no animation along here, so what we should be able to do is just click on this and add some nodes, which is basically telling the plastic tool, hey, take strong control of this region down here. Okay, let's put it back into animate mode, and what we will see is that glitch no longer happens. So I can hit Control-Shift-R and re-render, and now we're back to our programming paradigm. What does this tell us? We need to go back to the other shot and fix it as well. So this is 511 that we're going to go back to, save all, go back to 511. As Brian Tracy would say, do it now. Do it now. Don't wait. Do it now. Do it now. Okay. Now, as you see here, the skeleton didn't, and as you can see, the problem is solved in both of the shots that involve the prints. I love the look of the bloom. I love the simplicity of the background. I'm digging the acting. I'm feeling pretty good about what I'm seeing. And, by the way, I'm done. I'm done. I'm going to be, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. And I am quite sure, be coming back to... Yeah, I'm liking it. I'm liking what I'm seeing. So, well, I told you this was going to be fun. This part of the show, this is the part of the first 2 episodes, actually. Of the whole first 2 episodes, this is the part I find the most fun. this interplay between the prince and Tianara, and then the farce that is going to flow out of it. Um, and it's very antagonistic. She sticks a knife in his face and basically says, "You didn't see me," and he's like, "Yeah, no problem, right on, baby," and off she goes. So, so there's a little bit of speculation about some burgeoning romance here, and I have no problem saying publicly that no. Yeah, eventually are Mel and Tia going to become fond of each other, and where might that go? Yeah, that's an open question, but basically, this is not about a romance. That's not what the show's really about. The only thing that'll make these two ever love each other, because initially they don't like each other very well at all, the only thing that's going to make them love each other is going through a lot of situations where their true character, their moral compass, and their choices are on display, and they have a burgeoning respect for one another as they see one another's strengths emerging. So that's kind of the idea of it. Somewhat inspired by my relationship with my lovely woman, Valerie, who's been a tremendous help and inspiration to me. So we have a bit of work yet to do. If we look at the timing on the show, it appears that, yeah, this is at 22:43. In all reality, at the end of the day, it needs to clock in pretty close to 22, actually, because you got to have an intro segment, and you got to have an outro segment. And arguably, you got to have a recap segment, which could be only 30 seconds, like previously on Salt and Light kind of thing. So the reality is probably 21.5 is an actual episode. So that's very good news, because it means that there's lots of room to chop this thing down, start cutting these edits even tighter, and really keep it moving. And then the final icing on the cake, which will be a lot of fun for me, is when I get to write the musical score and lay in all the sound effects and really make it play like a show. So anyway, that's it. That's what's going on. Maria says, "I'm always nice, but we learn how to critique. If it didn't work for me, I'd nicely suggest it." I appreciate that. And by the way, I don't just appreciate that. I depend on that. If something isn't working, I would respectfully ask you, please don't hesitate to say, "Yeah, I'm not so sure, Dave." Please don't hesitate to do that. I don't care who it is. So one thing I noticed with making films, and I'll end with this today. One thing I learned making films is that when you take a movie that you've chopped together and something about the shot or the sequence isn't working, I noticed a long time ago that even a very young child can tell that it's not working. They can't tell you why. They can't unpack what's wrong, but they can tell. Everybody, and obviously Maria is very accomplished in the world of theater and acting and all the rest, but not everybody is. And I think as filmmakers who hold our work precious, we would all do well to recognize the fact that any idiot off the street can tell a bad movie. They can tell a bad movie, and you should listen. And then if you can glean some wisdom as to why it's not working, then that's great. But if you can't, then you need to look deeper and get some advice or whatever. And and now the balance of that is that there is a time to say, you know what, we're out of time. This kind of goes back to our programming thing, our waterfall thing. There is a time to release the damn show. Let it out. Say, you know what, we've done our best. It's not going to get any better, or if it is, it's going to be minuscule changes. And let's commit to it and look forward to the next episode. That kind of thing. There's a time for that, right? So it's life is a balance. So anyway, with that, I'm gonna end on that very deep words of wisdom, which hopefully will find their way deep into your soul and cause you to look up at the sky and find enlightenment and joy that stays with you for years and years to come. Yes, that is what we hope for you. So, that's it. I'm done. There will be more